Do not, repeat, do not try this in court.
Come back again.
The judge delivers the verdict. Life in prison. The courtroom falls silent. Then suddenly, screams, tears, violent outbursts. Some collapse in shock. Others lash out in pure rage. These are the most jaw-dropping, unhinged reactions from female convicts who just realized they'll never walk free again. Number 10. The Diana Lovejoy murder plot gone wrong. Diana Lovejoy's story is one of betrayal, deception, and an attempt at murder that failed spectacularly. Along with an accomplice, Lovejoy attempted to murder her ex-husband, but the plan was so poorly executed that the husband survived. What followed was a swift conviction, but for Lovejoy, the sentencing day was far from calm. As the jury found her guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, she collapsed in court in a dramatic fainting spell. But the drama didn't stop there. As Lovejoy was dragged from the courtroom, her life unraveled in front of the cameras. The reality of the life sentence, paired with the public spectacle of her emotional breakdown, sent shockwaves through the courtroom. It's difficult to imagine what went through her mind at that moment. Did she know that her failed plot had destroyed her life? Or was it the sheer horror of facing the consequences of her actions that broke her? What makes this case especially gripping is the coldness with which she orchestrated the crime. She had plotted to kill her ex-husband and enlist the help of a hitman, but the plan quickly fell apart. Her emotional collapse in the courtroom served as a reminder of the devastating consequences that come from a life built on lies and deception. Number 9. The Ohio woman who played the race card. In Ohio, a woman who had hired a hitman to kill her boyfriend faced a life sentence without parole. But the real story here wasn't just the brutal crime, it was the shocking behavior she displayed in court. As the judge handed down her sentence, the woman stood up and accused him of being racist. She argued that her punishment was unjust and that she was being unfairly targeted because of her race. It's a claim that's been made in many cases, but what followed this accusation was completely unexpected. The judge, refusing to let her attempt to manipulate the court, stood up, unzipped his robe, and made an unforgettable statement. He said he was going to impose a sentence that would resonate throughout the entire state of Ohio, and that when the race card was played in such a disgusting way, it would result in the harshest possible penalty. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. He delivered the sentence with cold precision: life without parole. This dramatic exchange left the woman speechless, and many onlookers stunned. The idea that someone could go to such lengths to avoid responsibility for their actions is not only shocking, but terrifying. The weight of her actions, paired with her desperate attempt to manipulate the system, led to a verdict that she would never escape. Number 8. The San Diego woman who shot her family. It was a typical courtroom in San Diego when a woman was sentenced to 80 years in prison for the attempted murder of her husband and the shooting of her 14-year-old daughter. But what was not typical was the reaction that followed. As the judge delivered her sentence, she erupted in anger, shouting across the room, throwing harsh words at the judge and showing no remorse for her actions. She denied any wrongdoing, claiming her husband had shot their daughter first and that her actions were simply retaliation. The scene was wild as the woman lashed out with no fear, no remorse, and no respect for the authority of the court. The courtroom, which had been filled with tension over the course of the trial, became even more electric as she ranted, accusing the judge of being unjust. As security moved in to restrain her and take her away, the woman's fury only grew. It was a haunting reminder of how a life sentence can shatter the mind and push an individual into a fit of anger. Number 7. The Vermont woman who killed her family. A chilling tragedy occurred in Vermont when a woman, overcome with anger and grief, took the lives of 3 of her relatives and a social worker. The woman had blamed them for taking her daughter away from her, and in an act of retaliatory violence, she took matters into her own hands. What followed her actions was equally haunting. Her breakdown in court after being handed a life sentence without parole. The courtroom was silent as the woman's tears flowed. She had admitted to killing social worker Laura Sobel and her family members, but the emotional weight of the sentencing still hit her like a freight train. She had to face the fact that she would never again be free, that her life was over. The anger, the regret, the disbelief all flooded her at once, and she couldn't contain it. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as she wept uncontrollably, her world collapsing around her. Prosecutors called the murders methodical, and the judge's sentence reflected the calculated nature of her actions. It was clear that the court wasn't just punishing her for the murders, it was sending a message. And as the woman broke down in front of the judge, it seemed like her own emotional collapse mirrored the utter devastation she had caused in the lives of her victims. Number 6, the religious couple and their child's death. The case of the young couple who refused medical help for their infant daughter is one that shakes the soul. The couple, claiming religious reasons for not seeking medical attention, watched as their baby slowly succumbed to neglect. What followed was an investigation, where it was revealed that their refusal to care for the child led to her tragic death. To make matters worse, their other children, aged 2 and 4, were found to be in poor health, their bodies weak and malnourished from the parents' refusal to vaccinate them. The couple's reaction to their life sentence was chilling. They stood in the courtroom, facing the reality that their actions had cost them everything. They had not only lost their child, but would now spend the rest of their lives behind bars for their neglect. Their breakdowns were filled with guilt, but was it genuine remorse? Or were they simply realizing the consequences of their actions? The tragic nature of this case, combined with the couple's refusal to change their mindset even after their child's death, makes this one of the most disturbing freakouts. It serves as a haunting reminder of the lengths some people will go to in order to justify their actions, and how, when reality hits, there's no escaping the consequences. Number 5, Bonnie Duarte, a tragic consequence. Bonnie Duarte's life was forever altered on March 29, 2018, when her reckless decision to drive while intoxicated led to a catastrophic crash that claimed the lives of 3 teenagers. With a blood alcohol level more than 3 times the legal limit, she collided with a Toyota Corolla carrying 4 young passengers, causing it to ignite and kill 18-year-old Dylan Mack and 17-year-olds Brooke Hawley and AJ Rossi. The 4th passenger, Alexis Vargas, survived but was severely injured. At her sentencing, Bonnie tearfully begged for forgiveness, taking full responsibility for the devastation she caused, but her apology fell short in comforting the grieving families. Judge Gary Peer sentenced her to 45 years for second-degree murder and an additional 6 years for causing great bodily injury to Alexis. Despite her remorse, Bonnie's emotional apology could not undo the irreversible damage, leaving her children motherless and the victims' families forever scarred. Number 4, Roxana Sikorski, coerced into the unthinkable. Roxana Sikorski's story is one of manipulation, confusion, and youthful vulnerability. At just 15 years old, she became embroiled in a chilling plot to murder her entire family. The architect of this plan was Michael Rivera, her older boyfriend, who convinced her through texts and manipulation that the only way to protect him from prosecution was for her to kill her parents and siblings. The emotional weight of the case was immense, as Roxana wept uncontrollably in the courtroom. Her defense argued that she was a child misled by an adult, while her mother tearfully read a statement, pleading for leniency. It was clear that Roxana was a victim of a predator's manipulation, but that didn't erase the chilling reality of what she had been coerced into. The plan was horrific. Roxana intended to slit her little brother's throat, but she faltered. A scuffle ensued, waking her sister, and the opportunity for murder slipped away. Despite the failure, the law still came after Roxana, and she was sentenced to between 10 and 20 years in prison. This case wasn't just about a failed murder plot. It was a tragic tale of how easily a vulnerable teenager could be manipulated into committing an unthinkable crime. Roxana's tears were not just for her lost future, but for the family she had almost destroyed. Was she simply a pawn in a twisted game, or did her actions show something darker at play? Number 3, Shelby Isaac, the fatal consequences of rage. Shelby Isaac's emotional collapse in the courtroom reflected the intense weight of her horrific actions, which altered the lives of all involved. In January 2016, Shelby shot and killed Eddie Tate Jr. after an argument over a hair extension purchase, while his pregnant girlfriend, Edua Thomas, was also critically injured. Eddie died at the scene, and Edua later succumbed to her injuries, marking a tragic end to what began as a heated dispute. Shelby's actions were reportedly sparked by a conflict over a refund or possible theft, but regardless of the details, her decision to resort to violence left 2 families in devastation. At her sentencing, Judge James Lamey handed down a 30-year sentence for first-degree murder and reckless homicide. Despite Shelby's tearful outburst, it was clear that no amount of grief could undo the irreversible consequences of her crime. The courtroom echoed with the sorrow of the victims' families, who would never see their loved ones again, while Shelby's own grief was overshadowed by the fact that her actions had destroyed multiple lives. Her case serves as a reminder that the consequences of rage and impulsivity can be deadly, leaving a legacy of pain that can never be erased. Number 2. Vonda Smith, obsession that led to murder. In May 2018, Vonda Smith entered the Greene County Criminal Court a picture of composure. She even found time to embrace her attorney, a brief moment of peace before the storm. By the time the judge delivered the verdict, however, her demeanor had completely changed. Tears flowed down her face as the reality of the life sentence set in. Vonda Smith was found guilty of first-degree murder after the brutal slaying of 21-year-old Nicole Morrison, a pregnant woman who was in a brief relationship with Vonda's son. The motive? An obsession with her grandson, the product of her son's relationship with Morrison. Vonda wanted to stay close to him, but Morrison was standing in her way. As the trial unfolded, prosecutors painted a picture of a woman driven by jealousy and fear of losing her connection with her grandson. It wasn't just the murder of Nicole Morrison that sealed Vonda's fate. It was the second-degree murder of Morrison's unborn child. But there was more to the story. Investigations revealed a possible accomplice, though Vonda's guilt was undeniable. The vicious attack, blunt force trauma and skull fractures, left no doubt that this was a calculated act of violence. Vonda's tears in the courtroom weren't for remorse, but for the life she would now lose behind bars. The case was a heartbreaking reminder of the dark places obsession can take a person, and how love can be twisted into something deadly. Number 1. Sandra Lane, a life shattered by tragedy. Sandra Lane, a 75-year-old retired schoolteacher from Detroit, had lived a quiet life until April 2013, when everything changed. In a heart-wrenching moment, Sandra was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder. The victim? Her own grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. Despite being a loving grandmother who had spent her life nurturing students, Sandra found herself in the middle of an unimaginable tragedy. The event that led to this shocking crime was years of tension and trauma. Sandra had taken on the responsibility of raising Jonathan after his parents' divorce, but he spiraled into drug addiction. On a fateful night in March 2012, a violent argument erupted between them, and Sandra, fearing for her life, shot Jonathan 10 times. In court, Sandra sobbed uncontrollably, overwhelmed by guilt and grief. Her daughter, Jennifer Hoffman, sought justice for her son's death, offering no comfort to her mother. Sandra's defense argued that she acted out of fear, but the jury didn't believe it. They sentenced her to life in prison, leaving many to wonder, was Sandra a victim of fear, or the tragic result of a broken family? So, What do you think? Which of these female convict freakouts left you speechless? Do you believe their emotional reactions were sincere? Or was it just a display of guilt? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video for more shocking and emotional stories from the courtroom.